black hotel maid answered her phone in Dutch, and within 72 hours, she wasn't cleaning floors. She was dismantling a $50,000 corporate scandal no one saw coming. Zoe Johnson's mop glided across the polished marble floor of the Grand Plaza Hotel, each stroke as meticulous as her mother had taught her. The lobby gleamed under crystal chandeliers, echoing with the confident laughter of guests and the casual voices of front desk receptionists, most of them white, chatting on personal calls uninterrupted. No one noticed Zoe, not really. She was part of the furniture to them, a uniform, a brown face, a silent presence with a name tag no one ever read. But at that moment, her phone buzzed in her apron pocket, and everything changed. She recognized the number instantly. The University of Amsterdam. Her heart skipped. After 6 rejections and months of silence, this could be the call that mattered. She looked around. No one was watching, at least she thought so. She ducked behind one of the ornate marble columns and answered in a whisper. "Zoe Johnson," she said quietly, already trembling. On the other end, a warm voice responded in perfect Dutch. "Mevrouw Johnson, godemiddag, dit is Professor van Echton van de Universiteit. We've reviewed your application again." Zoe's reply came reflexively, smoothly, her Dutch flowing with native-level precision. She switched registers mid-sentence, explaining about her motivation letter, her timeline, her passion for sociolinguistics and cross-cultural semantics. As she spoke, something in her shifted. For a few seconds, she wasn't a maid anymore. She was herself, the linguist, the writer, the academic. But the moment was too perfect to last. A sharp voice sliced through the air. "Johnson, what do you think you're doing?" She turned. Standing 5 feet away, arms crossed and eyes burning, was Sarah Richards, the floor manager. Next to her, silent but visibly intrigued, stood a man Zoe had only ever seen in news articles and financial magazines. Richard Coleman, the billionaire owner of the Grand Plaza chain. Zoe froze, the Dutch words still lingering on her tongue. She ended the call quickly, stumbling over her words. "Ik bel u later terug, sorry," she murmured into the phone, then hung up. "In my office, now." The walk to the back corridor felt like walking into a courtroom. As Zoe passed the front desk, the same receptionists who laughed loudly on calls earlier now watched her like she was guilty of theft. She kept her head down, her face calm, but her chest tightened with each step. In the small staff office, Richard slammed the door behind them. "No phones during work hours. That's rule number 1, Johnson. And what language were you even speaking?" "French." "Dutch," Zoe replied quietly, instinctively, then immediately regretted it. "I don't care if it was Martian," Richard snapped. "You embarrassed this hotel." In the middle of the lobby, a cleaning woman chatting away like she's on vacation, right in front of Mr. Coleman. Zoe said nothing. She had learned long ago that silence was safer than protest. "You're on bathroom duty at the convention center, effective immediately. Maybe there you can speak whatever you want without disturbing real guests." Her chest burned, not just from the unfairness, but from the pattern. White receptionist who FaceTimed her boyfriend by the elevators every shift never got so much as a warning. The intern who once played music from her phone while folding brochures had only been asked to lower it. But for Zoe, degrees, certificates, and all, it was always a punishment, a reminder. "You can go now and be grateful you're not fired." That night, Zoe sat in the corner of her shared apartment, knees tucked to her chest. Her roommates, both nurses, had left for night shift. She stared at the wall where her Georgetown degree hung beside framed certificates from language institutes in Seoul, Milan, and Tokyo, a museum of forgotten effort. 6 years scrubbing floors, folding sheets, wiping mirrors, all while sending resumes into silence. Once, she had counted 47 job applications within the hotel's own departments. 0 responses. Except for one email. "We regret to inform you," she scrolled back to the call log. "One missed call. One message from Professor Van Echton. We believe your profile is exceptional. Call us back." And beneath that, a second voicemail. "Unknown number, American area code, male voice. Ms. Johnson, this is Richard Coleman. I'd like to speak with you tomorrow morning, personally." She blinked. In the dim light of her small bedroom, something stirred in her chest, not hope. Not yet, just the beginning of a tremor. She didn't know that across the city, in a penthouse office with glass walls, Richard Coleman had played back a recording of her voice, speaking flawless Dutch. And next to that file, he had pulled another document, an article in the Journal of Applied Linguistics. Author, Zoe Johnson. He smiled to himself. Not many maids quote sociolinguistic variants in multilingual environments. And that was the moment he knew she wasn't supposed to be invisible. She was the storm they never saw coming. The basement office always smelled faintly of bleach and forgotten time. Fluorescent lights flickered overhead as Zoe Johnson stood motionless, her hands clasped in front of her apron, the sting of humiliation still fresh on her skin. Across from her, Manager Richards tapped a pen against the desk, her mouth curled into the kind of smile people wore when they believed power made them untouchable. "You like speaking foreign languages, don't you, Johnson?" she said, voice laced with mockery. "Well, good news. Starting tomorrow, you'll be assigned to the convention center bathrooms. Lots of international guests pass through there. Maybe you can chat with the toilets in Mandarin while you mop." Zoe didn't respond. She had learned the hard way that answering back only made things worse. Richards leaned forward, savoring the moment. "You're lucky I'm not writing you up for insubordination." Coleman may have been too polite to say anything. "But he saw you, a maid hiding behind a column, chattering like a tourist in his lobby. That's not what professionalism looks like." The pen clicked again, dismissed. As Zoe turned to leave, she heard the soft hiss of the manager's voice behind her. "Maybe next time you'll remember where you belong." The service elevator creaked as it descended, echoing the weight in Zoe's chest. She didn't cry, not there, not yet. That night, the city outside was buzzing with life. But Zoe's apartment was silent. Her two roommates, both nurses on the night shift, had left dinner covered on the counter. She didn't touch it. She went straight to her room, kicked off her shoes, and sat cross-legged on the floor beneath the window. Her eyes drifted up to the wall above her bed. A degree from Georgetown University, frame cracked from an old move. Certificates from Seoul, Milan, and Tokyo. Proof she once believed her knowledge would take her somewhere. The peeling paint made the wall look like it had weathered just as much disappointment as she had. She stared for a long time. In her lap, her phone buzzed once. Then again, she didn't check it right away. Instead, she leaned her head back against the wall and closed her eyes. Her body ached, but worse was the ache beneath the skin, the kind that no one saw. The kind that came from being told every single day in 1,000 subtle ways that you are not enough. Or worse, that you are too much, too qualified, too black, too articulate, too visible in a place that prefers you silent. When she finally looked at her phone, the screen lit up with a notification. One missed call, unknown number, and beneath it a voicemail from HR. This time she sat upright. Her finger hovered over the message, but she didn't press play, not yet, not after what happened earlier, not after being humiliated in front of her peers. Maybe it was a formality. Maybe they were going to terminate her after all. She wouldn't put it past them to schedule the punishment in waves. Shame first, then the axe. She scrolled further. A second notification. Email from the University of Amsterdam. Her breath caught. The message was short. A professor named Van Achton had followed up their earlier call. He thanked her for her linguistic insights and added one more line. "We would be honored to revisit your application, Ms. Johnson." Zoe didn't smile. She couldn't, not yet. The day had been too cruel, too precise in its tearing down. Outside her door, a gentle knock. "Zoe?" It was Maya, one of her roommates, still in scrubs, her shift delayed. She stepped inside, took one look at Zoe's face, and sat beside her without asking. They didn't talk. Maya just handed her a cup of hot tea and placed a hand on her back. "You're the smartest person I know," Maya whispered. Zoe shook her head slowly. "Smart doesn't matter if no one sees you." Maya didn't argue, she just stayed. What neither of them knew was that 2 floors above the lobby where Zoe had been humiliated, HR had spent the afternoon reviewing a special request, personally submitted by Richard Coleman, a name he had underlined twice. A meeting he wanted arranged before the week ended. No explanation given, only one instruction. "Find Zoe Johnson, tell her she's been seen." The elevator ride to the top floor felt longer than it should have. Zoe stood alone, her hands clenched tightly in front of her, trying to steady her breath as the numbers lit up one by one. She had never been this high in the Grand Plaza Hotel. The top floors weren't made for people like her. They were for executives, high-paying guests, and boardrooms filled with decisions made in polished suits. She was wearing non-slip shoes and a cleaning badge that still smelled faintly of bleach. When the doors slid open, the hallway stretched ahead like another world. Quiet, carpeted, decorated in soft lighting and minimalist art. Her sneakers squeaked on the floor. "Johnson," the receptionist at the HR front desk, looked up. "You can go in, they're waiting." Zoe didn't ask who they were. She assumed the worst. Probably HR and a legal representative. Maybe they'd finally decided that her phone call was a fireable offense. She braced herself for it. Her footsteps were light, hesitant, like someone entering a courtroom, but the room she was led into was not a conference room. It was the office, large, sunlit, walls paneled with warm oak. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city skyline. And behind a desk made of glass and steel sat Richard Coleman himself, the billionaire, the man whose signature was on every corner of the Grand Plaza brand. He stood when she entered, closed a file slowly, and gestured to the chair across from him. "Miss Johnson," he said, "please sit." Zoe's legs moved before her mind caught up. She sat on the edge of the chair, back straight, heart pounding in her ears. She had never heard her name in that tone before, not from someone like him. "I assume you're wondering why you're here," Coleman said, settling back into his seat. He didn't smile. His voice was calm but deliberate, like someone who had already made a decision. Zoe nodded slowly, unsure if she was allowed to speak. Dutch, French, Italian, Mandarin. He glanced down at the open file again. Korean and Spanish too, correct? Zoe blinked. "Yes, sir," she said quietly. He looked up. "And you hold an honors degree in linguistics from Georgetown?" "Yes. Graduated with distinction, international certifications, 6 languages, and you've been working in housekeeping for 6 years. Zoe swallowed. "I applied for other roles. There were no openings." "I checked." Coleman said, 47 applications, 12 internal transfer requests, all denied. He tapped the file with a finger. "By the same 2 people each time, Manager Richards and Director Whitmore." She said nothing. Coleman leaned forward slightly. "I heard you, Ms. Johnson, in the lobby, speaking Dutch with perfect fluency, not conversational, native-level fluency, and I wondered, what is someone like that doing cleaning floor tiles at the Grand Plaza?" Zoe looked down at her hands. "Because it's the only job that called back." For a long moment, Coleman was silent. Then he said, 3 months ago, I commissioned an independent consulting firm to investigate employee retention across our East Coast properties. We were losing multilingual talent, especially non-white talent. I suspected something, but I didn't expect to find it standing in front of me in a cleaning uniform." Zoe's breath caught. Coleman continued, Your file was buried in a not suitable for advancement folder. No flags, no notes, just quietly ignored for 6 years." Zoe clenched her jaw. "I submitted my resume with every application, sometimes twice. I know I have them all now." He opened a drawer and pulled out a second folder, thicker. Emails, internal memos, even a few HR recommendation letters that were never followed up on. "You weren't invisible, Ms. Johnson, you were buried." Zoe sat perfectly still. The words didn't sting because they weren't new. What stunned her was that someone like him had taken the time to notice, to dig. Coleman stood, walking toward the window. "Tomorrow we begin a major international trade conference here. Dutch and Chinese delegations. High stakes, high scrutiny. I need someone on site who can translate in real time. Someone who understands not just the words, but the culture, the nuance." He turned back to her. "I want you to coordinate international relations for the event. Temporary for now, but full authority, access. Compensation of $5,000 per week." Zoe stared at him. "Me? You? Why?" He smiled faintly. "Because I heard you speak Dutch, because your credentials are undeniable, and because I suspect there's something very wrong in my company, and you just might be the person to help me find it." For the first time in 6 years, Zoe didn't feel like she had to explain her worth. She didn't have to fight for acknowledgement. It had found her. And what she didn't know, what no one knew yet, was that this wasn't just about a temporary role. Richard Coleman wasn't just offering her a job. He was opening the first crack in a system about to crumble. The next morning, Zoe stood outside the executive conference suite with a new badge clipped to her blazer. It felt strange, like wearing someone else's name. The gold letters read International Relations Coordinator. It wasn't just a title. It was a mirror. Reflecting back, the version of herself she used to believe in. The version that once dreamed of working with embassies, negotiating with grace across cultures. That version had gone silent years ago, but now she was being called forward again. Inside, staff bustled with preparations for the Grand Plaza's biggest event of the quarter. A multinational trade conference bringing together Dutch and Chinese executives, government liaisons, and private stakeholders. Coleman walked beside her, calmly giving her the overview. Security had been tripled. Press would arrive the day after tomorrow. Everything had to be flawless. He stopped at a sleek table stacked with folders. Zoe reached for one labeled Opening Remarks Mandarin. She opened it. Her eyes moved quickly across the page, and then they stopped. "Excuse me," she said, flipping to the second page. "This translation, it's wrong." Coleman raised an eyebrow. "Wrong how?" Zoe didn't hesitate. This phrase, "we value our growing bond," was translated using terminology associated with romantic relationships. In a business context, it sounds inappropriate. And this one here, strategic partnership, it's missing the hierarchical marker. In Chinese culture, that's a serious omission. It suggests arrogance. Coleman leaned closer. You're sure? Zoe nodded. Whoever translated this knows vocabulary, but not tone, not context, not culture. She pulled a pen from her pocket and began marking the pages. Within minutes, she had rewritten key phrases, added footnotes, and outlined suggested adjustments. Coleman watched silently, then asked, how did you spot those errors so fast? Zoe looked up. Because language is more than words, it's trust. You don't build diplomacy on misused idioms. He didn't respond right away. Instead, he picked up the folder and turned it over. A logo was printed on the back. Whitmore International Language Services. Zoe recognized the name instantly. Coleman's face darkened slightly. But he said nothing. He walked a few paces away, phone in hand. He tapped the screen once, then again. Zoe couldn't hear what he said, but she saw his jaw tighten. When he returned, his tone was calm but sharper. These materials cost us over $50,000. Whitmore insisted on using his preferred vendor. He said they were certified. Zoe's fingers brushed the folder again. They're not. I don't think they are. This isn't a professional-level Mandarin translation, at least not from someone trained in formal business use. Coleman gave a short nod. Tomorrow, you'll be running point on all multilingual operations during the conference. That includes screening final communications, moderating any sensitive exchanges, and stepping in if anything feels off. Understood? Zoe blinked. You want me to lead? I want you to make sure this conference doesn't collapse under its own arrogance, Coleman said, then added, and yes, that means lead. Her chest tightened. She wasn't sure if it was fear or pride. Why me? She asked, not out of modesty, but because part of her still didn't believe it. He turned to her fully, arms crossed. Because you caught what others missed. Because you've already saved me from a public disaster. And because I have a feeling you're just getting started. She didn't know how to answer that, so she didn't. Later that afternoon, Zoe sat in the VIP suite turned temporary command center, reviewing the digital files one by one. The Mandarin materials weren't the only ones riddled with errors. The Korean versions, too, lacked basic honorific forms. The Japanese scripts confused company ranks. Someone had been cutting corners, or worse, never had the qualifications in the first place. She opened the vendor database. It took her 15 minutes to trace the company's incorporation, and then she saw it, the name on the ownership document. Ashley Whitmore. Zoe stared at the screen, her heart slowing. She remembered that name, Whitmore's niece. She had bragged about being a language consultant in a company Christmas video. Zoe had cleaned the conference room after that shoot. No one had introduced her. She wasn't meant to be part of the conversation, just background. But now that background was coming into focus. Zoe printed out the report, clipped her revised translations to it, and placed the folder on the corner of her desk. She didn't say anything, not yet, but Coleman would see it, and when he did, the puzzle he had been quietly piecing together for months would start to make sense. Outside, the sky over Manhattan was turning gold, a city preparing for another night of light and motion. Inside, Zoe sat perfectly still, surrounded by silence and truth, and somewhere far below, Whitmore had no idea that a cleaning woman he'd rejected for 6 years was about to dismantle everything he thought was protected, word by word, sentence by sentence. By the second day of the conference, the Grand Plaza was humming like a perfectly tuned machine. Zoe moved between rooms and cultures like a conductor of invisible music. She translated, clarified, and bridged silent tensions before they sparked. Dutch executives smiled when she greeted them in their language. Chinese delegates nodded respectfully when she adjusted the seating chart according to seniority, something the previous organizer had overlooked. There were no mistakes, no misunderstandings, just smooth coordination and Zoe moving through it all like she had always belonged. It was during a mid-morning break that Thomas Whitmore finally approached her. She saw him before he spoke, cutting through the crowd like a man used to owning space. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Ms. Johnson," he said, voice smooth, practiced. "I must say I'm impressed. Clearly Richards misjudged your potential." Zoe turned toward him, calm, composed. "Did she?" Whitmore chuckled. "Indeed. I had no idea you were so linguistically inclined. Mandarin, Dutch, Korean, that's quite the resume." Zoe tilted her head slightly. "Yes, it is. That resume's been in your system for 6 years." He blinked. "I submitted it 47 times, she continued, voice steady. 12 internal transfer requests, all denied, each marked position filled or not a match." Whitmore's smile wavered. "That doesn't sound right. If there was an issue, it must have been a misunderstanding. Maybe something got lost in the shuffle. I kept all the confirmations, Zoe said, pulling out her phone. Every auto response, every rejection, including the one where I applied for the International Relations Assistant position 2 years ago. The job went to someone who didn't speak a single language other than English. Whitmore took a slow breath. Look, Ms. Johnson, I'm not here to debate the past. What matters is that you're finally getting the recognition you deserve. Zoe's eyes narrowed. Is that why your niece submitted translations for this conference under a fake Mandarin certification? The air shifted. Whitmore's hand lowered from his pocket. Excuse me, I verified it this morning, Zoe said. Peking University has no record of certifying Ashley Whitmore, and yet her company billed Grand Plaza over $50,000 for expert-level translation services. Whitmore's face paled, but he recovered quickly. You're stepping out of line. No, Zoe said quietly. For the first time, I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. You think this little moment in the spotlight changes anything? You're a cleaning lady with a dictionary. You don't know how this world works. Zoe didn't flinch. She pulled a folded sheet of paper from her folder and handed it to him. That's a transcript of one of the Mandarin phrases your niece translated as business loyalty forever. In context, it actually means binding servitude. I caught it before it reached the delegates. Whitmore didn't take the paper. He stared at it like it might burn him. I've also got copies of the original invoices, Zoe added, the inflated rates, the conflicting dates, all filed under your authorization code. His jaw clenched. This is a witch hunt. Zoe shook her head. No, this is accountability, and I'm not alone. At that moment, a quiet voice interrupted. She's telling the truth. They both turned to see Zoe Williams, the new HR analyst, standing just behind them. Tablet was in hand, screen lit with internal records. I've been auditing the contracts for 3 months, she said. When Ms. Johnson flagged the translation errors, I went deeper. Ashley Whitmore's company was approved without full credentials. There's a pattern across departments. Qualified candidates, particularly women of color, repeatedly overlooked or dismissed. Whitmore's voice rose. Who do you think you are? This is above your pay grade. Zoe Williams didn't back down. It's not about pay grade, it's about ethics. Whitmore looked back at Zoe Johnson. You won't last a month. You don't belong in this world. Zoe smiled, but it wasn't soft. It was precise. I've lasted 6 years scrubbing floors beneath the people you promoted, and I'm still here, which means I'm stronger than every gate you've built. Whitmore turned to walk away, but paused. If you come after my family, you'll regret it. Zoe reached into her pocket and tapped her phone. The screen showed a recording app. You've said a lot of things this week, Mr. Whitmore. I recorded them all, every whisper, every threat. He didn't speak again. He simply walked off, his spine stiff and expression unreadable. That night, Zoe stood at her desk in the executive wing, organizing materials for day 3 of the conference. The lights around her were low. The city beyond the glass glowed like a constellation. In her inbox, a message blinked with a new subject line, urgent, board meeting, immediate attendance required. She didn't panic. She simply closed her laptop, picked up the folder of evidence, and walked calmly toward the elevator. The war had begun, yes, but not with shouting, not with spectacle. It began with words, and Zoe knew how to wield them like a blade. The executive auditorium at the Grand Plaza was packed. Every seat filled, every breath held just a little tighter than usual. Managers, directors, regional heads, and international guests sat in rows of polished leather chairs, murmurs rippling like wind through dry leaves. No one had expected this. An emergency all-hands meeting. No agenda, no warning, just a notice, be there. At the front of the room, a massive screen glowed blue. Grand Plaza emblem faded into a spreadsheet, and beside it stood Richard Coleman, hands clasped, face unreadable. Zoe Johnson sat behind him off to the side, not hidden, not elevated. Just present, calm and watching. Coleman stepped forward. Thank you for coming on such short notice, he began. This morning, during the 3rd day of our international conference, a member of our team identified a critical error in the translation of a master contract. He paused, let the silence hold. An error that, had it gone unnoticed, would have jeopardized a multi-million-dollar agreement and permanently damaged our relationship with international partners. Several heads turned, a few faces flushed. Coleman gestured toward the screen. That error was not random. It was part of a pattern of poor translation, inflated service costs, falsified credentials, and more disturbingly, a quiet, sustained effort to exclude qualified talent from advancement within this company. A second slide appeared, a chart, hiring records, names, applications, notes like not a cultural fit and overqualified. Most of the rejected names were Black, Latino, or Asian. Most were women. Zoe watched as the data did what years of silence could not. It shouted. For the past 5 years, Coleman continued. Several department heads have authorized contracts with vendors lacking basic qualifications. In many cases, those vendors were directly tied to family members. In at least one case, a niece. A murmur, eyes turned, some heads lowered. Coleman's voice dropped sharper now. Today, that ends. He turned to face the crowd fully. Effective immediately, Thomas Whitmore is terminated for cause. Sarah Richards is suspended pending a full investigation into her role in obstructing internal mobility and suppressing employee files. Gasps, audible, sharp. Sarah Richards, sitting near the back, went pale. She didn't speak. She didn't move. Coleman didn't pause. Beginning this week, we are launching a full audit of all hiring, promotion, and contracting practices across our entire company. Every resume, every rejection, every contract, no exceptions. The screen behind him shifted again. A final slide. Zoe's file, Georgetown, 6 languages, international certifications, and below that her title. Which brings me to our next announcement, Coleman said. In recognition of the extraordinary professionalism, integrity, and impact shown during this crisis, I am proud to appoint Dr. Zoe Johnson as our new Global Director of Multilingual Communications. Silence, then applause. It started slow. A few claps from the back, janitorial staff, housekeeping, kitchen leads. Then it spread, stronger, clearer. Executives followed, some out of shock, some out of guilt, some out of something deeper. Zoe stood slowly and nodded. She didn't smile, not yet, not here. She had nothing to prove anymore. Coleman stepped aside as she approached the podium. I'd like to say one thing, Zoe said, voice steady. This isn't just about me. This isn't just about one missed opportunity or one bad hire. This is about a system, one that tells people like me, that we should be grateful just to be allowed in the building. Her eyes scanned the room. Talent doesn't live in boardrooms. It lives in laundry rooms, in back hallways, in uniform closets, and it stays hidden when no one's willing to look. She stepped back, no more words needed. As Coleman resumed the mic, Whitmore was quietly escorted out of the room. No words, no eye contact, just a man who had built his kingdom on silent walls, now watching them crumble, brick by brick. What started with a phone call in Dutch had become something much louder. And it wasn't over yet. 6 months later, the nameplate on the office door read, Dr. Zoe Johnson, Vice President of Diversity and International Relations. It was engraved in gold against smooth oak, understated but impossible to miss. From the 32nd floor, the skyline of Manhattan stretched in every direction, morning light catching on glass towers like the start of something new. Zoe stood at the window, a quiet cup of tea in her hands, watching the city breathe beneath her. She didn't come in early out of habit. She came in early because there was work to do. The Invisible Talent Initiative had become more than a program. It was a movement. Across Grand Plaza properties nationwide, over 147 employees had been identified, housekeepers with degrees in finance, bellhops fluent in 4 languages, dishwashers who'd once managed logistics operations overseas, people who had once been passed over, now promoted, now seen. Guest satisfaction scores had surged. Translation costs had dropped by 78%. And for the first time in the hotel's history, international partners were asking to speak directly with the team Zoe had built. She never used the word revolution, but others had started to. Her office phone buzzed. Her assistant, also named Zoe, poked in with a grin. Conference call is ready. All regional managers are on the line, and a courier dropped this off. She handed Zoe a white envelope with a red seal. Amsterdam, no return address, but Zoe already knew. She opened it after the meeting. A letter, typed formal, an invitation from the University of Applied Linguistics offering her a position as visiting professor, 6-week residency, all expenses covered. A footnote at the bottom, Professor Van Achton sends his admiration. Zoe folded the letter carefully and slipped it into a drawer. Another door opened, another life maybe, but she didn't need to decide now. She had learned that time is generous with those who do the work. That afternoon she walked through the lobby of the Grand Plaza, not as a guest, not as a maid, just as herself. A few new trainees passed her, heads down, unsure whether to greet her. She smiled first. They smiled back. Change, she knew, started in small nods. Near the elevators, an old colleague stood arranging flowers in a vase. A woman Zoe had once worked with on night shifts. They exchanged a quiet hug. The woman looked at Zoe with a smirk. If you hadn't answered that call in the lobby. Zoe laughed, I'd still be waxing floors, probably humming to myself in Dutch. The woman laughed too, and still forgiving everyone. Zoe nodded gently. Some people bury you, some water you, they just don't know which they're doing until you bloom. She kept walking, back upstairs, past the polished glass and silent offices. She paused outside one door, knocked. Inside was a 10-year-old girl sitting beside her mother, one of Zoe's old roommates. The same woman who had made her tea the night she nearly gave up. Zoe reached into her blazer pocket and pulled out a neatly folded letter. "This is for you," she said, handing it to the little girl. The mother looked confused. The daughter opened the letter and read aloud. Her eyes widened. It was a scholarship, full, funded by a new foundation Zoe had started for hotel workers' children. First recipient, a girl who once dreamed of managing the very hotel where her mother cleaned. Zoe knelt beside her and said, "You don't have to wait 6 years to be seen." Outside the office window, the sky shifted toward dusk. The lights of the city began to blink awake. Inside, Zoe stood, watching the mother wipe tears away as her daughter hugged the letter to her chest. The elevator chimed in the distance. Somewhere, another story was beginning. And it all started with a phone call in Dutch. If you enjoyed this story, let us know in the comments. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more inspiring stories.